and we're live, and we're awake at such a strange time. It'll be interesting to see how much interaction we get, but I can't sleep because I'm so excited about the Rugby World Cup final. England versus South Africa. England have made it to another World Cup final. I've watched England in a World Cup final in 2003, which they won, and then they got to the World Cup final again in 2007, I think, and they lost. And they've managed to make it to another World Cup final. England versus South Africa. And because the World Cup is being held in Japan, the match is, of course, on at a strange time in the morning. I think it's always exciting when the World Cup, whether it's the Football World Cup or the Rugby World Cup, if it's held somewhere far away and the matches take place at a strange time because of the time difference, then you have this real sense of the World Cup being far away and being in a foreign land. And I think that's part of the appeal of going on holiday. You're out of your own comfort zone and you're out of your own time zone. And I remember being on holiday in Morocco and finding it quite stressful, the fact that because I was in the same time zone, and when it's 1 o'clock in Marrakesh, it's 1 o'clock in London, and you almost feel like you're not on holiday. When you go on holiday, you want to get away from the office or away from work. You want to be completely out of that mindset. And if you're in the same time zone, you perhaps don't feel so far away. So England are out there in Japan, many hours ahead, over there in the east, in the land of the rising sun. And in a few hours, they'll be kicking off against South Africa, the Springboks, one of the great international rugby heavyweights. But as an Ireland fan, first and foremost, it is very difficult to get behind England. And I think the England rugby team, the England rugby union team, are particularly difficult to get behind because of what that sport represents politically and what it's associated with. And in England, rugby union is very much a south of England thing. It's very much a private school sport. It's very much a sport of the privileged. Contrast that with rugby union in Wales, just across the River Severn, which is very much a working class sport, very much a sport of the people. And there's Jamal Samiev acknowledging the fact that it's a late one. Yes, it is a late one, because I'm buzzing for the Rugby World Cup. Not really, I'm just awake anyway. But Jamal and I watched a good rugby match once, very early in the morning, when the World Cup was being held in New Zealand. I think the 2011 World Cup. We got up early and got ourselves down the pub to watch another disappointment when Ireland were knocked out of the World Cup at the hands of Wales. I think that was in a quarter-final. Ireland have never made it beyond a quarter-final in a World Cup, sadly. And they came into this World Cup ranked number one, whether deservedly or not. But they certainly didn't finish in first place. And England have the chance to. South Africa have the chance to. And it's kind of a joke that Irish fans, Scottish fans, Welsh fans will support anyone but England. And England are a difficult team to get behind, given that it's rugby, given that they are generally representing this privileged section of society. But then what does rugby mean in South Africa? Rugby was brought to South Africa as a colonial sport for a very long time. It was played only by white people. And of course, there are black players in the team now, but I still sense that as an institution, rugby union in South Africa is dominated by that white privileged class. And it's the same, I think, with cricket and other sports that were brought to different parts of the world via the empire. And even in Ireland, some hardcore Republican nationalist people would be skeptical of rugby union as being some kind of, as the Gaelic Athletic Association would describe it, foreign sport. English games were not permitted to be played. For example, in Croke Park, the national stadium for the Gaelic games, i.e. Gaelic football and hurling, for a long time they would not accept that football, as in association football, or rugby, or any of these foreign sports, as they would describe it, would be played in their stadium. And as much as the Gaelic Athletic Association was about sport, it was actually about preserving Irish culture, and is very heavily politicized in that sense. So it's a difficult one, because rugby union is a chance for the whole of Ireland as a united entity to perform on the world stage. But the real hardcore Irish Republicans would perhaps find it difficult to get behind a team that is playing a foreign sport, an English sport. And they might throw terms around such as West Brit, this disparaging term for an Irishman who wishes he was an Englishman, who has adopted English traditions and mentality and is playing an English sport. But look, sport is international now, and even the English rugby team has diversified. It is not as dominated by the public schools as it would have been in previous times. And South Africa have diversified, and they have black players. I mean, I know it's only less than 30 years ago that black people and white people led completely segregated lives in South Africa, never mind playing on the same rugby team. I know it's crazy to think that. So good luck, England. Good luck, South Africa. May the best team win. I'm jealous that Ireland didn't make it to the final, didn't make it past the quarter-final, as usual. But if I'm still awake when the kickoff goes off, I should really. Who should I root for? I don't know. I should root for England, I suppose. But it's a playful jealousy that Ireland and England have. It shouldn't be hateful, I don't think. But there is that joke every time the World Cup comes round, or the Six Nations, that the Scots and the Welsh and the Irish are all rooting for anyone but England, we do like an underdog. But yeah, that's the main sporting event this weekend. But there was some sports entertainment, not officially a sport, but sports entertainment. The WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, well, WWF as we used to call it, and Tyson Fury took on Braun Strowman. I don't even. I'm so out of touch with wrestling. In my day, it was Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and the Legion of Doom and the Undertaker. But yet another heavyweight boxer crossing over into the world of professional wrestling, the fake choreographed and scripted world of professional wrestling. And Tyson Fury won. I wonder, did he only agree to be involved in the wrestling event if he was guaranteed to win? You know, I mean, they know the outcome before he gets in the ring. So, yeah, I wonder. It was a good performance. Like, we shouldn't dismiss professional wrestling just because it's a scripted, choreographed act. I mean, these people are highly skilled, highly trained actors, and they are fighters as well. They will be trained in wrestling, whether it's Greco-Roman or the other one, freestyle. And even the likes of Brock Lesnar, who was an Olympian and then he performed in the WWE and was a great attraction. He then won the title when he fought as a pro mixed martial artist. And that is I mean, that proves it, that or at least some of these guys can fight for real. And this is what brought mixed martial arts to the forefront and made it such a popular sport. It is the idea of finding out, or originally it was about what would happen if you put a boxer in a ring with a wrestler, or you put a karate guy in with a judo guy. And it would seem initially, the jiu-jitsu guys were coming out on top and the Gracies were dominating. But then you had to learn everything. People got wise to the jiu-jitsu techniques, and if you have a good background in wrestling and good takedown defense and the fight never gets to the ground, then maybe jiu-jitsu will never come into it. But I think might have been Bruce Lee that said a lifetime traditional martial arts practitioner can be defeated by someone with a year's boxing and a year's wrestling. If you have good boxing and good wrestling, I think that makes you a lethal fighter. And I don't wish to dismiss any martial art. I've always said I've got huge respect for every martial art and every martial artist. And look, every dojo is different. You could train jiu-jitsu somewhere where they take things very light and they do the technique and they instruct you. You can be very well versed in every technique and know the names back to front. Or you could train in a very tough gym that does lots of sparring, lots of hard rolling, lots of grappling, and that's where you actually, and sends you to real competition. This is where you really cut your teeth. This is how you test the gold with fire and you test it. So any martial. It's not which martial art. It's the martial artist who is competing. But it was interesting to see Tyson Fury in there trying to pin the guy to the floor, and then complaining to the referee, saying, "What? That was 3 seconds, wasn't it?" And he was really getting into the spirit of it. And I think he was doing it because his kids are big fans of WWE. So that's nice. And maybe when he's retired, when he's done with the boxing, maybe that could be something that he could cross over into. So that was nice to see. Who else has crossed over? I know Floyd Mayweather did a little bit of WWE. I remember him. Was it the Big Show? I remember him punching someone in the face with some kind of knuckle duster over his fist. And years ago, during his ban, I think, from professional boxing, Muhammad Ali had a crossover rules genuine match with a martial artist, and there was some confusion about what the rules were and what the rules weren't, and what this guy could do. And in the end, the only technique that this martial artist, the name escapes me, the only technique that he could manage to use against Muhammad Ali was to kind of crawl on his back, almost like a crab, and kick Muhammad Ali in the shins, which kind of looked pathetic. But Muhammad Ali's corner were actually getting very concerned about the damage that was being done to his legs throughout the duration of this match. And the whole thing was something of a farce. And I think it was scored a draw in the end. I'm not sure. But this is obviously the inspiration behind that moment in Rocky 3 when Rocky Balboa takes on Thunderlips, played by Hulk Hogan, in a great moment, a great character. He's essentially playing himself. And Rocky comes out and they start circling around, and he's like, "Okay, I'll chase you around, then you chase me around." And then Hulk Hogan just brings it on full on and starts going for him. And Balboa's kind of shocked that they're not going with the script, and this is some kind of a real fight. And I think Rocky gets bashed up and thrown on the floor, and Adrian's looking on in horror, and Mick's nearly having a heart attack before he has a real one. And then eventually he claws it back as always, and picks him up and throws him over the top rope. And then at the end, he's getting a picture with him together, and he goes, "Hey, why'd you get so crazy out there?" And I think Hulk Hogan says, "That's the name of the game." So it's always been fascinating to think, what if so-and-so, such an athlete, could a top boxer really beat a wrestler? Could a judo guy beat, I don't know, ninjutsu? What's the best one? What's the most lethal? Krav Maga, that's the one. That's the real martial art, because that kills you, apparently. So yeah, that was some interesting sports entertainment. But in other news, let's come back to reality. Mr. Epstein was found to have been strangled. Can you believe it? I can. I think that's another fake situation that's been scripted, rather like a professional wrestling match. But I'll do a whole show on that another time. But It's exactly what we were predicting. And also, sports news: Conor McGregor was fined €1,000 for his assault on an old man who refused to try his drink. And it's such a shame when we look at martial artists. I mean, look, I'm a martial arts fan, and I always hold up martial arts as some kind of way of instilling discipline in an individual. And the traditional martial arts were always about honor and putting on the uniform and lining up and bowing and showing respect for your sensei, respect for your opponent. And that respect is meant to extend into your daily life and not just be for 2 hours in the dojo. And you would hope that the best athletes, the best martial artists, the highly trained martial artists would have that respect in their character. But Conor McGregor, many times, unfortunately, has conducted himself in a disrespectful manner, and he disrespected opponents, and he assaulted a elderly gentleman in a pub. And to be fair, Conor McGregor apologised, and so he should. And I hope that he can move on and improve and come back and redeem not only his career, but his character. But what must becoming a multi-millionaire in your 20s do to an individual? How must that change you? And I have to compare it to Mike Tyson, another great hero of mine, another supreme athlete, one of the, whether you say he's the best or one of the best of all time. I know a lot of hardcore Tyson fans like to say, "Oh, Prime Tyson, nobody beats Prime Tyson." Well, look, he was the best at one point, and he was the youngest ever heavyweight champion. But did becoming a multi-millionaire overnight at such a young age make him go into the drug abuse, into the violent outbursts in the public eye? Or was such a highly strung individual someone that treads that fine line between genius and madness? Were they just destined to go off the rails at some point? I think a lot of top athletes are on that fine line between genius and madness. And a lot of these individuals excel in the sport, and maybe they peak early. I look at George Best. I think his football career was finished at 28 or so. Absolute genius, absolutely obsessed with their sport, with their skill, and with training and honing their skill and perfecting themselves. But once that is out of the picture, it's a huge void to fill. It's a huge gap to fill, and sometimes these people never fill it. And if you've made millions, what is there to strive for? When Conor McGregor was struggling to make ends meet and living on benefits and working as a plumber, he had that drive. He would have had that reason why. It's like the cliche of waking up at 5 a.m. to go running or whatever it is. I don't know why it has to be 5 a.m, but apparently that's when these top athletes like to do their road work. When you don't know when your next meal is, where your next meal is coming from, I guess that is inspiration enough to get you out there to put the work in. And when you lose that because you're a multi-millionaire, it's difficult. And maybe the amateur sports that are not, and which rugby was until recently, that are not so much about money, maybe these athletes have a lower risk of going off the rails because they're not going to become millionaires overnight. I don't know, could be wrong. I could do a whole talk on amateur versus professional sports. But here's a question from the comments. Tundra M is saying, what's your favourite Arabic dialect? Well, while we're on the subject, there is no subject. Whatever you want to talk about, by the way, anything goes at this time of night. We're going to keep it quite lucid and fluid and get into that flow state. Sometimes when we're tired, we actually think better because we are more fluent in our thoughts. So what is my favourite Arabic dialect? Wow. I would say that the one I can understand the most, not that I understand all of it, would be the dialect in Palestine and the surrounding region. Is that the Shami dialect, Balad al-Sham? I guess there are four main dialects of Arabic. Gulf Arabic, Balad al-Sham, Maghribi, and modern standard Arabic, Fusha. Is that right? Are there four? Are there other Arabic dialects that I haven't mentioned? And if you, I guess Iraqi, maybe Eastern Arabic. And if you're Jordanian, I'm guessing you speak Arabic the way that a Palestinian would, or I'm sure you can tell the difference from. I mean, even different regions of Palestine have unique accents. I'm told that the accent in Hebron, in Khalil, they tend to elongate the words very long. Ana min Khalil. That's a exaggeration. And Tundra M is saying the Shami dialect differs a lot from northern Syrian or Lebanese and say southern Levant, South Palestinian and Jordanian. Yeah, there you go. And even in the countryside, I believe sort of rural. There are rural areas in Palestine where the accent becomes almost Iraqi, and they have the ch. Wallah himmik becomes wallah himmich, and these sort of things. And some people say they pronounce the qaf differently, and that's interesting. Tandrem is saying the Gaza dialect is closest to Jordanian. I wonder why Gaza would be close to Jordan. You would think geographically they're closer to Egypt, but 90% of the people in Gaza are refugees or descended from refugees, so presumably their accent, it will be reminiscent of whatever the accent was in the town where they left in 1948 when they were expelled from their towns and villages. So that's interesting that they ended up sounding Jordanian. Jordan M. Tundra M is saying Jordanians and Palestinians use the ch sound a lot, especially the elderly folk. That's interesting. I wonder why. I don't understand Arabic well enough to really pick up on different accents, but I always associated the ch sound with Iraq and Shlonech, Chefich. but yeah, I could be wrong. Tundra M, whereabouts in Jordan are you? Are you in the capital? I've visited Amman several times, usually on my way in to Palestine, and I found it to be a friendly and pleasant city. You're in Madaba. I don't know where Madaba is. I don't know if that's in north, south, east, or west. I've south of Amman. Yeah, I visited Petra in Jordan, and I visited Wadi Rum, the valley in the desert. Beautiful, beautiful part of the world, and a peaceful country. And I was chatting to a colleague tonight, doing working in security, and we were talking about the Arab world. The guy's Moroccan, and I said, "Why is it Morocco, compared to other parts of the Arab world, is very peaceful, and Jordan is also very peaceful, and they have something both in common?" Tundra M, I'll extend the question to you. What is it that Jordan and Morocco have in common that makes them a peaceful country? Can you guess what is the common denominator? And a few other countries in that region have this factor, and it would seem to make the country more peaceful. No guesses. The answer is they are monarchies. They have a monarchy. And it's a sad fact that people will respect a king, a monarch, a born ruler more so than they will respect a president, even if the president is so-called elected. But a lot of the presidents in the Arab world are elected with a turnout of the vote, which is well, up to 100% or maybe over 100% in some cases. Yeah, in many parts of the Arab world, there's a president because the president killed the king. And Tundra M is saying, I think it's because Jordanians are mostly Arab tribes united by a family. Yeah, maybe. Is it still a tribal society? Would people know what tribe they are? I know it's the Hashemite kingdom, so the royal family are claiming lineage from the prophet. And interestingly, the king of Morocco also claims to have lineage going back to the prophet, which would explain perhaps why people are willing to obey them. Tundrem is saying this is why it's impossible for a coup or what happened in Syria to happen in Jordan. If the Hashemites fall, there is no more Jordan. Yes, I guess you're right. And Jordan, or as it was known, Transjordan, is essentially a piece of the Middle East that has been carved out by the imperial powers and drawn up by the Sykes-Picot Agreement. I don't know how you feel about that. Tandrem is saying a lot of Jordanian identity is part and parcel dependent on the family. Yes, I mean, 100 years ago, were you Jordanians? And this is an argument that gets thrown at the Palestinians. And Zionists will say, oh, there was no Palestinian state. 100 years ago, these people were just Arabs living in the Ottoman Empire, which is true in a sense, but also irrelevant, because where you're from is where you're from. And if you are from the town of Haifa, you should be allowed to live there, regardless of your race, regardless of your religion, regardless of whichever state was controlling the region at the time, whether you were under the Ottoman Turks, whether you were under the British Mandate, or whether you're now under Israeli occupation, you should be allowed to live in the town that you are from, in your ancestral land. And the double standard is that there are Americans and Russians and people from every corner of the world who can go and live in Haifa tomorrow because of the religious background that they are from, whether they believe in it or not. And there are people born there who cannot return to the homes that they still have the keys to. But as we go on in years, and as 1948 becomes so much longer ago, as they said originally, the hope was that the old will die and the young will forget. So at which point do you say enough is enough? It's been 70 years, 72 years, 80 years, 90 years. In God willing, in my lifetime, it will be 100 years. If I live another 30 years or so, it'll have been 100 years since the creation of Israel. And at what point do Palestinians become like the Zionists, clinging to a homeland that is no longer in living memory? But the answer, I think the simple answer is, if the Zionists would not give up after 2,000 years, why should the Palestinians be asked to give up after 70 or 100? And if there are two people, I mean, I think there are more than two peoples, but if we're being simplistic and saying there are Palestinians and Israelis, both with a legitimate claim to that land, then both should be able to live together as equals. And that's not what's happening at the moment. It's certainly not equal treatment. And Tundra is saying Palestinians and Jordanians are the same exact people, if you ask me. We were one until the Zionist state was carved out and made us two. Okay, well, I mean, where do you want to draw the line? What about the Lebanese? What about the Syrians? You're all Arabs from Balad al-Sham, but that shouldn't mean that people from the land known as Palestine should be forced to go and live elsewhere. And Tundra M is saying West/East Palestine. I don't know. It's an interesting topic. I didn't think I'd get into Palestine topic tonight, but we've brought it up. Why not? Anything goes. By the way, Tundra M, if you want to speak on the phone, the number is in the description. Give me a ring. I'll put you on air. But yes, these decisions were made by the imperial powers around the time of the First World War, when the whole world was getting carved up, and obviously Israel was created or came into existence shortly after the Second World War. And the Second World War is apparently something that we shouldn't be learning about. There was a chap on TV the other morning on GMTV. I don't know if you saw it. Freddie Bentley, who's a young person, he's being described as a millennial, and which means you were born, I don't know, recently. And he was saying that World War II, the Second World War, should not be taught in schools in the United Kingdom because it is not good for children's mental health, because the imagery is too graphic. The events were too traumatic for children to learn about. But if we can't learn about the Second World War, then what can we learn about? Whether it was traumatic or not, this is a reality. it happened. And if we don't learn the lessons from the past, we are destined to repeat the same mistakes. So I think, I mean, it's a classic story of uh, millennial snowflake doesn't want children to be upset by something. Tundra M is saying children shouldn't have to be subjected to it. Tundra M, children need to learn reality. We don't have to show them a graphic video of people being shot to death, but we need to understand the facts. And I'm sure the way the Second World War is taught in schools could be looked at. I know that history is always written by the victors, and certainly we could think about how we address a subject, but we must address the subject of the Second World War, when Europe stood up to fascism. And I think, if anything, people's perceptions of who won the war, how the war was won, and how many lives were sacrificed from which side, surely in this country people grossly underestimate or overestimate the role of the British servicemen and women as compared to Russia or the Soviet Union, who lost 20 million lives. Tundra, I'm saying I think it depends on the age. Yeah, look, I'm not saying that we should give young children nightmares. I mean, we're already teaching. I mean, this is the funny thing. I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but this airy, fairy, snowflake millennial, Freddie Bentley, who is desperate for children not to learn about the Second World War, I wonder what his position would be on sex education and teaching young children about LGBTQ issues, for example. Now, I'm jumping the gun, but people on that side of the fence who are very against triggering young people or causing someone to have nightmares or a traumatic experience, sometimes, and maybe I'm stereotyping, sometimes people on that side of the fence are quite keen to push the LGBTQ agenda and education on young children, or push for this sort of education. I may be wrong, I may be jumping the gun, I may be prejudice, but that's just a thought I had regarding that debate. And the guy opposite him was Sir Michael Wilshaw, who was apparently a former chief of Ofsted, and this is the how would you describe Ofsted? Well, they are in charge of inspecting schools, and they rate schools on a scale from I think outstanding to good to satisfactory to unsatisfactory, and they're not very popular with teachers because teachers don't like being judged, do they? But yeah, food for thought. Anyway, that just about wraps it up. Tundra M has added, I don't agree with sex education as a course in schools anyway. At most, teaching about biological intercourse should be in biology class and not much more. Really? But isn't there more to relationships than the biological side of it? Isn't that the problem? And it's an old cliche, but they say the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, but that it doesn't show enough. because it doesn't address the emotional side to relationships and intercourse, and it reduces it to just an interaction, or sometimes a transaction, which is very shallow indeed. And we don't approve of that on this show. And Tundra M is saying it's an escape mechanism for people to vent. Maybe it is. And so is this channel, Lessons for Life. And if you have any topic that you would like to talk about, get in touch with me. As ever, the email is lessonsforlife247@gmail.com. In the meantime, let me wish all competitors in the Rugby World Cup final the very best of luck. May the best team win. And we will do it all again soon. This has been Lessons for Life. We were here. We're gone. Laters.